All right, welcome to another episode of the WP Crowd, our first recorded episode. So we're not live, as you might notice. This is not Friday; it's actually Tuesday, but we're recording on Friday. So say hello to the past, I guess, or the future. Weird space-time continuum stuff going on. Anyway, today we're talking. We're kind of continuing our conversation from last week, leveling up as a WordPress developer. I wanted to start talking about specifics a little bit more. We kind of touched on a lot of vague, high-level things, and today I wanted to really focus in on one thing, which we talked about, which is asking the community for help. One of the things that we talked about last week is when you hit a wall as a developer and you're trying to learn, trying to do more things, there's many routes you can take to kind of, Google something or kind of get past that wall, that hurdle. And one of the main things that we all had a consensus on was ask the community. Don't be afraid to ask. I know your ego might get in the way, but feel free to ask. There's great communities out there. And then ultimately also Google. Google is a great resource. I'm sure everyone that's on this podcast right now has used Google at least once in their life to solve an issue, except for Jesse, who just knows everything. So yeah, let's start there. I'm gonna start with Matt, because Matt, let's start with intros. That's actually the best place to start. I'm going to start on my left with Carl.
Hello. Sorry, you lagged out. Hi, I'm Carl. I write on carlalexander.ca. I also do a lot of WordCamp presentations. I'm blanking out right now, so we'll leave it at that.
All right, Jesse.
I'm Jesse Peterson. I'm a Genesis developer down in Florida, and I like coming on here on Fridays and presenting to you on Tuesdays now.
Nice.
Nice. Yep. All right, Josh.
Hi, Roy. Thanks for having me. I'm Josh Pollock, and I'm currently a developer and owner at KildareWP.com on Friday. Hard to say what I'll be on Tuesday. But thanks for having me, and I'm Josh412 on Twitter.
All right, and Matt.
I'm Matt Cromwell. I'm head of support and community outreach at WordPress. We built the Give plugin, and I do support every single day, and that's why I'm here to talk about it on Friday. I don't care what everybody else says, it's Friday.
And I'm Roy, as usual. I'm a WordPress developer at Disney, and I do WordPress stuff and help people level up. So, back to our main topic, asking people questions. Matt runs a very small Facebook group called Advanced WordPress. There's only a few people that are part of it, but it is a very cool community of advanced WordPress people asking advanced WordPress questions and giving advanced WordPress answers. The one thing that most of us kind of agree to or have seen in advanced WordPress, and I think Matt has actually removed certain posts, is you need to ask the right question. If you're going to be asking the community a question about something, whether it's a quick code question or something a little more complex, there's a right way to ask and there's a wrong way to ask. And when I say wrong way, I mean you're probably not going to get an answer, or if you get an answer, it's going to be probably along the same lines of the tone you ask the question in. So let me just turn it to Matt. Matt, as the kind of one of the main, you run AWP, Advanced WordPress on Facebook. What do you look for when you see a new post and it's a question? Like what are some tips you might have for people who need to pose a question?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a big difference between how folks ask for support in a public forum like AWP or even on the WordPress.org repository compared to how you would ask support for a plugin that you bought or for a product in general, product support. There's two different kinds of ways to ask questions of other folks. So when you're talking about a public forum, basically you're going into a place where there's a bunch of we have almost, Roy was chiding about the size of the group. We're almost 20,000 members at AWP now. You're going into a group of a whole bunch of folks that a lot of folks are there who have tons and tons of experience and tons of knowledge, and they're there for their benefit. They're trying to be there in order to learn something or to gain from it in one way or another, and they also are there to help out, but they're all there as volunteers. They're not there as to spend their time on you. They're there to volunteer, to help out, to be friendly. So in this case, you're asking for free support. You're asking for free help, free advice from people who have been there and done that and are being generous with their time. So like Roy said, tone is really, really important. If your tone is like, I can't believe WordPress is broke again, da 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 da, this is so stupid, now somebody fix this for me, that's not going to go very far. There's not going to be a whole lot of traction on something like that. The other one that doesn't get a lot of traction in general is basically saying, it's broke, how do I fix it? Which, I'm kind of exaggerating a little bit, but a lot of requests that I see, especially on like the WordPress support forums, are essentially that. It's broke, how do I fix it? If you don't give context in what is broke and how it broke, or what you were doing when it broke, or what your environment is like, how to reproduce the problem at all, nobody is going to be able to help at all. It's not that people don't want to. It's not that people that wouldn't like to help you with your issue. It's that it's not physically possible to help you with your issue because nobody knows what your issue is. So you kind of open a Pandora's box. I can keep ranting for a while if you like, Roy, but that's a summary of my thoughts.
So I'm going to turn it to Josh, actually. So you brought up a really good point, which I didn't even think about, was there is a kind of a notion of, there's a difference between someone asking a question in a public space, let's say Advanced WordPress, any Facebook group, and someone asking a question in kind of a private support forum, specifically maybe one that they paid for. So Josh, you also run a plugin or two, and you have to support them. So how do you have any tips for people who are asking, let's say, a support question for something they actually paid for? Do you feel like you have to answer all of them because they paid, or are there certain ones that you will maybe turn to first, or you appreciate more? Like, if I am a customer of your plugin and I need to ask you a question, what is the best way for me to formulate my question so that you will answer it promptly?
Okay, so I think you've asked a few questions here, which is one of which I'm bringing up not just to troll you, but because lots of people ask lots of questions at the same time, or they'll come back and say like, oh yeah, like I know you said that, but I also made this change since we first started talking, and that's a big deal. Like, where people want troubleshooting advice, but they can't keep their original problem constant. And it makes it's like Matt says, like it makes it really hard to be helped. For us, we don't offer any sort of free support. WordPress.org wants to force you into offering free support to people who aren't your customers. We don't do that. You can come to our site if you're a paying customer and open a support ticket, and we answer every one of them within a business day, because that's how professional companies should work. But I think that it does really come down to, just like Matt said, like, how much work are you going to put into being helped? Because I don't know. Like, it works in my site most of the time. Like, I love when somebody points something out about one of my plugins, and it's not just a problem with something else. They make a clear point, and I'm like, yeah, our thing's broken. That's great. I can fix that. Thank you for pointing that out. And I think that in our community, we need to not be jerks about that when people come at us and say, like, hey, it's broken. Because not everybody knows that WP debug is a thing. People don't know how to open up a JavaScript console. Right? We've all had people come at us like, hey, your plugin's busted. And the answer is like, no, it's not. Some other plugin's throwing a console error. But people don't know those skills. And as much as it sucks to have to be that teacher or pull those teeth, every time you do that for somebody, you do make an impact towards getting the whole community going better towards like, and especially when it's in public, like on AWP, saying like, here are the skills you need to actually describe your problem and get help. I think that helps people.
Yep, I like that too. That's a really good point. That in terms of helping people help themselves, basically.
They're not skills everybody has. People don't know how to troubleshoot.
Yep.
And it sucks that like my job is to teach you that. When it's not even my problem, but at the end of the day, like it comes around.
Yep.
Okay. Jesse, you're kind of big in the Genesis community. How about in that community? I know that while a lot of questions for Matt or Josh will be plugin specific to their plugin and might range, I'd imagine a lot of the Genesis stuff is actually specific to the thousands of hooks that Genesis has. So how do you format a question, or how do you prefer a formatted question when it pertains to actually like a certain piece of code, or how to do something with code a little more specific than, you know, hey, I need a slider, more like, hey, I need to know how to use this hook or something?
Yeah, well, you have to start really at the beginning, because sometimes some people think they're running Genesis and they're not, which causes a whole lot of problems when you try to troubleshoot it. And then you have to find out if they ever made that switch about 2 years ago to Genesis 2.0, because then all the hooks changed. And that causes some more problems. So you have to locate exactly what version people are running on to know what kind of code to submit to them. And then you're usually able to pull from some snippets that you've already used or that someone has already written a tutorial about and just link to it to answer. If it becomes a little more complex than that, yeah, take the time to sort it out in a local dev, because I know every Genesis developer has about 10 Genesis installs on local. You just pop open PHP Storm and start working on it, and you can give them an answer pretty quickly. But we like to use resources. There's some membership sites that have hundreds of tutorials on them at a pretty good deal that will get you an answer in about 3 minutes.
You brought up a good point, and this is where I'm going to bring Carl in, since Carl hasn't said anything yet. Ever since I met Carl in Toronto 2 years ago, actually, like 2014, I think, me and him have been on a very similar mission, although he's much more excelled than I am. Our overall mission is obviously to help people level up their game, whether it's in code, WordPress community, in general. I feel like we've both been on the same tangential parallel mission of trying to help people grow their knowledge base. So Jesse brought up a good point where it's, someone's going to ask a question, and most likely a simple tutorial or simple search will find them the answer. They just, I don't know, either A, refuse to do that little bit of work, or B, they don't know how to. So Carl, as someone who wants to help the community level up, what are some ways that maybe, let's just say this, what are some tips that you can give to people to help them level up so they can, pre-asking the question, like before coming to ask the question, what are some things that they can do and how to do them well so they don't actually have to ask the question to begin with, if that makes any sense? It made sense in my head.
I mean, it makes sense. It's a bit hard to answer that one because it goes against kind of human behavior. Most people, if you have access to somebody really smart that can answer the question in 2.5 seconds for you, you're most likely going to take that step versus either digging in the code or doing the necessary steps that might bring you a bit more clarity than just copy-pasting somebody else's solution, which is like the tricky part for any developer. So ever since Stack Overflow, that's always been the problem now, is it's a lot easier to just Google a solution than it is to kind of try to figure it out on your own. But if you're willing to put the time, then it would be it'd be worthwhile to just try to skip the Google step for as long as you can and just try to start hacking on the solution yourself and see where you can get with that. Because again, a lot of the novel stuff that you're going to get is going to be people that are kind of thinking outside the box and not trying to copy paste something that somebody already figured out.
So
that answers it.
do you think people are skipping? Like I know, based on Jesse's response and what I've seen in the communities, at least the public ones, people definitely skip the Google step. They definitely, at least most of the time, it seems like they're skipping just a simple Google search for whatever error they're facing or how to use a shortcode or something. You're saying that people are actually skipping a step before that Google step, which is even like just looking at the code.
Well, yeah, trying to figure it out. I mean, it's kind of like if you think of like how you've grown as a developer, I'm pretty sure most of the times that you had the largest epiphanies were when you actually got your hands dirty, at least a fair amount, enough that maybe you went and Googled some stuff, but it was in context of like what you were trying to do. Because if you're just going to Google the answer, what's really going to happen is you're going to remember what you Googled for. You'll be like, oh yeah, I had the problem before. What did I Google it? And then you'll just Google that and solve it again, which is fine. But if you're trying to grow as a developer, you kind of need to start understanding what's going on behind those answers, which is not necessarily the most time. It depends on what ROI you want. If you're trying to make money and solve problems as fast as possible, it's probably not the best solution. But if you're trying to grow as a developer, it's definitely necessary because a lot of it is just keeping up to date and learning new things.
I still do that myself all the time. I still there's this one putting jQuery into no conflict mode. That whole little string before I do my function. Every single time I go to write that, I'm like, I always forget exactly. It's like jQuery document ready function $. Like every time. And there's one article that always comes up. I type in WordPress no conflict mode, and it comes up every single time. I'm like, if that article ever disappeared, I would never get any work done ever again. It's horrible.
Yeah, I use templates for and PHP storms, so just every time I start a JavaScript file, it has the no conflict mode.
That's smart. You're smarter than me. That's why.
Because I used to just look up that same article over and over again, that style. Can I jump on what Carl said though?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, go for it.
Carl was talking about like you can Google it and like cut and paste the answer versus you can like read the source and understand it. And I think that's a really, really important point, and people really are missing out on like the point of open source when they don't open the source and read it. Like we talk about the GPL, like, oh, can I copy that? Can I like take Matt's plugin and resell it? Like, sure, but that's not the point, and also you're a dick for doing so. The point is that I can, if I have a problem with Matt's plugin, I can look in Matt's plugin and see it. If I want to learn how a function in Matt's plugin works, I can do that, right? I can learn from what Matt's done. And WordPress is super well documented, and lots of great plugins are super well documented inline. And PHP Storm has that like click to see source that works so well, and I think people are like missing out where they're like, oh, like this isn't like, how does this work? It's like, just read it. It says right there in the source. And people are like afraid to read source code for some reason, and that's just missing the point of open source. And also, it's just going to make you a better developer by doing so.
I mean, why do you think people? I mean, forget. Let's say they don't understand the code, which is a let's say an issue of it's not like you can just pick up a German story, a German book and be able to read it. You don't understand the code, but if you don't know how to read the code, or let's say you do know, what do you think is stopping people from actually just opening it up and doing that?
I think it's a skill like that needs to be learned, just like troubleshooting. But also like how to read inline docs. Maybe that's what's missing. Is right where people say like, oh, I don't know how to know like what parameters this takes. It's like, well, it says right there in the source code. But maybe people don't know how to read PHP inline docs. people aren't used to that. People don't know what the shorthand means in certain places, maybe. I don't know. Maybe that's like a good article to write or a WordCamp talk, like how to read source code.
I think it's also just sometimes with what I notice in AWP especially is sometimes it's just frustration, simple frustration, that people are like, this is simple, it should be simple. Like, why isn't it simple? Just fix it, you know? There's a level in which I think the developers who really excel in the world are the developers who love taking their time to really dig in and learn. The folks who just want the quick fix, like maybe they're more focused on business management or whatever, but and they're never going to really get traction and start to actually learn and grow that way. But the ones who really take their time are the ones that do well.
It's definitely an aptitude. Having managed developers, not every developer is interested in figuring out how things are working really, and who can fault them, right? You have other deadlines, you have other priorities. Digging in and figuring out how it works is time-consuming with dubious ROI. So I can definitely understand why they don't do it. It's just I don't really know any good developer that hasn't done it. You know?
I think
that's really what it comes down to.
I think, and I don't want to. This is totally a tangential subject, which we could talk about some other time. But the main thing I see, and I totally agree with Carl, is when I look at someone I consider a good developer, I think fundamentally they have the passion or let's just say the curiosity for how things work, so to speak. Like, a lot of developer friends I have that I consider good developers love to take things apart when they were younger, or like to play with things like Legos, which allowed you to build stuff and take it apart and build something new with the same pieces. So I don't know. I think there's fundamentally something there, and not everyone has that, which is fine. But ultimately, you're not going to be what's it called? You're not going to be interested in how the source code is or how it works because you just don't care. If your ultimate goal is to sell $2,000 websites, 5 times a week or whatever, or once a month, then you're not going to care about the code. You're not going to have time to care about the code. You just want to crank out, themes and things that are just ready to sell. So I don't know. I think fundamentally there might be something there that's just a personality trait, maybe. That might be different between someone who's willing to dig into the code and someone who's not. But yeah, totally went off topic on that for a little bit. Back to the topic. Last question before we head out. When you are at that point when you're ready to Google something, let's say before you're willing to ask the community, because you want to Google something. I think there's kind of, and I call this Google foo, and I talked about it during my WordCamp talk in LA last year. I think there's kind of a way to Google something to actually get the results you want. And I'm not sure if anyone agrees with me or disagrees. Feel free to chime in. But typing in something like make a JavaScript slider, right, versus jQuery animate or jQuery fade are 2 completely different Google searches, and you're probably going to get 2 completely different results. And while your ultimate goal is, let's say, to have a fading animation effect of a slider, animation of a slideshow, you're going to understand a lot more, and you're going to get a lot more out of it if you're searching for, let's say, fundamental functions like fade out or fade in, things like that. Do you guys have any other suggestions for people when they are ready to Google something, how to, let's say, level up their Google game?
Sure. I like Googling stuff because I know so little. Actually, a little side note, I read last week that Bing has really upped their game on actually outputting useful code for you when you search, and so some developers are switching to Bing. So I was going to go ahead and try that next week, but I really like Google. I think that Google still likes the old Ask Jeeves format pretty well. To ask it in a question, usually gives you a pretty good source. And if you start off with something like a function, then you're usually going to end up over in the codex, which is a good place to start. And then once you dig into the codex a little bit more, then you can start looking for some tutorials. I've had problems in PHP where I didn't know what something that I was looking for was called. Like if you don't have a name for something, then you've got a fundamental language problem. So ask on Twitter or Facebook, what's this called in this programming language, and then you can start your search. Because without knowing what you're looking for, a conglomeration of symbols is not going to generally give you the answer that you want.
Yeah, one other example I had, just to keep it more WordPress specific, was when I first started out with WordPress, I'd search for things on Google like how to include a JavaScript file, and then it evolved into WP and Q script, like me actually searching for that function. And I think that's kind of the evolution of, from my point of view, as I see Google foo, as I call it, or being able to Google well, is that you start out and then you learn. You start out with something kind of vague because you know what your ultimate end product is. I want to include a JavaScript file, and then you learn. You read a couple tutorials, and then you ultimately find out that WP and Q script is the function that that handles it. So then now you're going to start searching for that. And as a, let's just say I consider myself an okay WordPress developer, I find myself Googling WP and Q script probably on a at least weekly basis, because as much as I know it and I could probably write it out without looking, there's always something that I always forget. Like, where does the version come in and where is the dependencies? I always get those switched or something like that. So I don't think it's necessarily bad to Google search all the time. I don't think it necessarily means I'm not learning anything. It just means that there's certain things that I just I don't want to retain because I know I have such easy access to it. But I know the lowest like function that I can get there, so I know exactly what to search for. When I started out with WordPress, I used to Google search the loop, because that loop, like if have post, while have post, the post, I could never ever remember that. And every single time I tried to do it without Google searching, I would get 100 errors or nothing on the page at all. So it took me probably almost a year till I finally understood how that loop in the query worked enough that I just stopped Googling for it.
That was when I started compiling code locally to pull from whenever I wanted it. I did want to point out, if anybody's interested in reading some cool source code, go to WP Includes Formatting PHP, and there's some really funny variables and descriptions around line 430 in 4.5. When you get there, you'll see. About line 430 and formatting PHP. And one last thing before everybody else takes over. Find a plugin developer that you really respect and you know does a good, clean job, and download 4 or 5 of their plugins locally, and then open them all up into your favorite editor, look through all the files, and try to walk your way through it. And you're going to find some really good stuff from people like Josh and from Norcross and Pippin. And you're going to learn a lot of stuff because they really document it and they use best practices.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd say stepping through code is definitely a big thing. But that's also part of the whole learn code, read code conversation, which I don't want to get into. So, any last parting pieces of advice for people who are going to be asking you for help in the next day? It's Tuesday, so there's still a couple more days left in the week, so you're going to get some more questions.
My big tip every single time people are asking questions is just be explicit and detailed. Like, the more explicit and detailed you could be, the better help you're going to get. Like, that by itself is 90% of the battle right there. Just explicit and detailed.
Sorry, one last thing. We have about less than a minute. Actually, I don't even know how much time we have left because I didn't even count when we started. But I'm assuming about a minute left. And I wanted to talk a little more about this, but didn't have the time. When you're answering a question, I think this is the flip side of this whole conversation, and I didn't want to create a whole podcast show about it. When you're answering a question, as a developer, I know it's really easy to just be like, why don't you just Google search something? Or to just post in a link of the let me Google that for you, and have them Google it. Don't do that. Don't be a dick. People are asking a question. Maybe they didn't take all the steps that you would have taken before they asked that question, but sometimes they generally just don't know and they want to know, and you don't know which person is going to be that one person that is actually going to take it to the next level and learn something from it. And I know that there's people that will ask a question 100 times. They'll ask the same question 100 times, and they'll never learn. And yeah, that's very annoying. But you never know. You never know if that one person that asked the question is going to be the person that's like, oh my god, this is awesome. Let me learn. Let me start reading the code and stuff. So as a developer, if you're going to answer someone's question, just don't be a dick about it. Be nice. Try to give off as much wisdom as you can. And if you're not going to do that, don't answer the question. Just ignore it and go about your merry way. Leave people to answer questions that want to answer questions. Don't just chime in with hashtags about how people are stupid. So that's my 2 cents. I'm sure Matt agrees with me because I agree with Matt. Yes.
Preach.
Thank you. Cool. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys next Tuesday, and I'll see you guys maybe on the podcast recording next Friday. Thank you guys for our first recorded episode. See you guys next